Every spring, there's 1 or 2 weekends out of the year where you see a bunch of people post really big fish or giant bags of fish. And in today's video, I'm going to break down how to identify these premier fishing weekends and what you need to be looking for to go out and have success on your bodies of water when the conditions line up effectively. So let's dive into this thing. Now, this video is going to be a little bit different than a lot of my recent content, talking about specific baits and topics and presentations. This video is going to be more theoretical, more anecdotal based, story based, where I tell you guys about what I've noticed and observed throughout the years. There's always 1 or 2 weekends out of the spring where guys consistently catch and post really big fish and really big bags of fish, and that's really coming up this weekend. I'm going to really break down all of the conditions, all of the things that I look for those premier fishing weekends when I know I can go out and have a shot at some of the biggest fish in my lake as well as some of the most fish. Now, if you guys don't know who I am, my name is Benjamin Nowak, and this channel is dedicated to teaching you bass fishing tips, taking you on trips, and talking to you about things such as when to go fishing and how to identify the best fishing conditions where you can have the most success on your bodies of water. So if you guys enjoy that style of content, please consider subscribing to the channel and growing this community. It's been a really fun ride over the past couple of months. The community has been growing. You guys are loving the videos. So consider subscribing and keep engaging with the content. And always let me know down in the comment section below what you guys would like to see in future videos. But without further ado, let's move into the content. Now, like I kind of alluded to in the introduction, there are certain weekends out of the year where you need to be on the water, where there are big fish that are going to be biting, there are big bags to be caught. And really what I look for, especially for smallmouth bass, which is what I'm looking for this upcoming weekend, are going to be certain conditions in the middle of the month of May when our water temps are starting to get right and these fish are starting to push pre-spawn. Now, I've kind of already fished through some of this for largemouth, but there's a really great bite coming up for both largemouth bass pushing up on the bed and smallmouth that are pushing up, starting to stage for the pre-spawn. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about are the conditions leading up to what I would consider a premier fishing weekend. The most important thing for me looking at is the air temperatures. Air temperatures and the conditions outside. Now, if you can lead into a weekend where you start to have a warming trend on like a Wednesday or Thursday, and that water temp is going to rise into the weekend, that's going to be a really, really good time to be on the water. Those water temps are going to rise up, especially if you get some warm rains, some warm nights, followed by sunny conditions. Especially for smallmouth bass, I'm really looking for those sunny condition days in the midst of a warming trend. That's going to allow those fish to push up into that shallow water. That shallow water is really going to warm up really quickly. And I'm going to be looking for these fish pushing into that less than 10 foot of water zone. Those fish are going to be up on the flats. They're going to be kind of roaming around, isolated dark spots, isolated pieces of cover. And in the midst of those warming trends, when your air temps maybe go from like the 50s and then you have a couple days up in the 60s or 70s and the nights stay warm, that water is going to rise up. Those water temps are going to rise up really, really quickly. Then you get that paired with some really sunny bluebird sky days, maybe a little light wind. It's going to help stir that surface temp into your water. Those fish are going to start to move into the shallows, even if they're not ready to spawn, even if that water temp is in like the low to mid 50 degree range. That's when I'm going to be looking for those fish to be up on the flats, roaming around, feeding really heavily and aggressively, even starting to consider getting up pre-spawning. And this is what I really love. Now, you can catch some giant fish on bed and it can be fun, but my favorite time of year to be on the water is in the middle of the month of May when you get those warming trends and those sunny days, because those fish are up roaming and feeding aggressively. They're not locked on a bed, so you don't have to make the perfect cast all the time to get that fish to eat it off a bed. I love catching those roamers. I love catching those fish up there feeding, and I don't like necessarily having to look at them sitting on a bed and just catching basically a fish in a barrel. I'm looking for those pre-spawners, the first major warming trends in the middle of the month, and when you get those sunny conditions with light wind, the conditions are going to set up perfectly to warm that water really quickly and encourage those fish to be in the shallows. The second thing that I'm going to look for, and this is something that doesn't necessarily have to line up perfectly with that warming trend, but if it does, you can kind of get ready for like one of the best weekends of your life, is going to be the moon phase. Now, one thing that happens, and I'm a big believer in the moon, especially during early season and late season, is with those full moon periods, and we have a full moon here on May 12th, with those full moon periods, and you get those warming trends, those fish are going to be roaming up in the shallows all throughout the night. So what does that mean for me? If those fish are up there and it's bright during the night because of the full moon, maybe those fish aren't spawning, but they're going to be more encouraged to be up in the shallow waters feeding throughout the night. the full moon, something about that pull gets those fish up onto those flats, and I believe it encourages them to feed more heavily during those nighttime periods. And I think the same thing can be said about the new moon. Maybe those fish aren't up on the flats feeding, but those fish, there's something about that new moon period, those big fish really want to bite. So when you compare up a warming trend with a major moon phase, such as a full moon or a new moon, you really start to get the perfect ingredients and recipe for some really giant fish to bite. And there's something about those moons where those biggest fish in your lakes really want to eat. Now, with all of that said, and moon phase might be important, I'm actually not targeting it on the night of the moon. So I'm not targeting to be on the water on the 12th. I'm targeting like to be on the water 2 or 3 days prior and 2 or 3 days after that moon phase. For some reason, it's that window around the moon that seems to have those fish move up, and it might happen on the full moon itself, but most of the time it's around the moon. Now, for example, last year, the moon does play a role, especially when those fish are up spawning. But last year we had that Hubbard Lake tournament, and the tournament fell, I believe, the day before or the day after the full moon. And I was out there practicing. I got to see what these fish were doing leading up to the tournament. But there were a bunch of fish kind of roaming around those shallow areas, and then you had the moon, and then immediately the next day, beds started popping up everywhere. There's something that happens around that full moon that encourages fish to make a push into the next phase of the spawn, whether it's pre-spawn, early pre-spawn into the main pre-spawn, or it's going from pre-spawn into actually physically making beds and spawning. There's something that happens around those moon phases, whether it's a new moon or full moon, that encourages fish to make a move into the next phase of the spawn, especially when you pair that up with good water temps, good weather conditions that will encourage these fish to move into those next phases. The next thing that I'm going to be considering is where those fish are currently at right now prior to that warming trend or prior to that moon phase, where those fish are at and what they're doing leading into it. Okay, so right now water temps are in the, I would say, mid to upper 40-degree range. With these warming nights and warm days and sunny conditions, that water's warming up quickly. These fish are still very like early pre-spawn. They're hanging out over deep water. They're sitting off the ledges. They're feeding, but they're feeding over deep water. You're having to scope them. As that water starts to warm up, those fish are going to start to push shallower. So those fish that were out deep, I'm going to be able to take and follow them off of the break to on the top of the break to now up in the pieces of cover that are on the flat. So while I start to look out at my trip that I'm taking next week, I know right now those fish are out over deep water starting to push onto the flat. By the time next week, when I get up there and the water temps are in the mid to upper 50-degree range, those fish should be far up on the flat. I can be looking in 3 to 8 foot of water, really shallow around isolated pieces of cover and structure where these fish are going to be sitting. But you have to understand the phase that those fish are in prior to all of these conditions happening. And if you can do that, you start to understand the pattern and progression that these fish are going to move through as you get into this warming trend, as you get into the moon phase, as you get into the next week and a half where these fish are going to really be biting. And this is all leading up to the pinnacle, which is the spawn, right? So pre-spawn, early pre-spawn out over deeper water, they start to get up on the break, start to be a little bit more aggressive and active, then they start to get up on the flat, they get into that like weird phase where they don't necessarily want to eat a whole bunch of things, then they get up and they start to roam around shallow pieces of cover or isolated bottom composition changes where those fish are going to be moving up and aggressively feeding. So understanding the progression, understanding where those fish are at and following them into that progression as they come up to spawn. And now I've made a couple videos recently talking about targeting shallow water fish, really in anticipation of that trip next week where I'm going to be targeting these fish in less than 10 foot of water. There's something that happens in May, whether the spring has been really cold or whether it's been really warm. There's something about the month of May where these fish will spawn in stages throughout the state of Michigan. You can pretty much count on it in the beginning of May, fish to be spawning on St. Clair. Then the second or third week of May, around that next moon phase, the fish to be spawning in the middle section of the state of Michigan. Then late May, they'll start to spawn a little bit further north. And then in June, they'll start to spawn up on the northern Michigan lakes. You can pretty much follow these spawning phases throughout the state and either chase them through the spawn or chase them through the post-spawn or pre-spawn, excuse me. It's just a very interesting concept that these fish will move in these phases and waves, and you can pretty much predict when you're going to be able to go out and have the very best days on your bodies of water. And I would encourage you guys, if you're not planning your trips, if you're not timing your trips and trying to look out and say, okay, this weekend you have a warming trend with a moon phase, I would encourage you guys to pay attention to these things leading into your trips, because it's going to help you prepare and anticipate what these fish are doing when you get on your body of water. This is when you can start to do map study, whether you're using Omnia with just the satellite mapping and zooming in and finding those isolated pieces of wood or isolated dark patches. This is the time when you can start to anticipate where these fish are going to be, what you need to be doing, and where you can be targeting these fish before you actually get to your body of water. I spend a ton of time on mapping this time of year. I spend a ton of time looking at satellite imaging, especially as you push up into the northern parts of Michigan and a lot of these states where you have cleaner water. You can really start to dial in where, when, and what these fish are going to be doing before you get to your body of water. But consider these things. Consider the weather, consider the moon phase, and consider the current spawning phase that those fish are in as you push into this premier weekend or these premier conditions. And you'll start to really be able to dial in key bites before you even get to your lake. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video, it's a little bit different. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section down below. Are there other things you'd like to hear me talk about? Whether it's diving deeper into how I approach certain bodies of water, how I approach certain patterns or techniques, feel free to let me know down there as well. If you guys want to check out another video similar to this where I talk about patterning fish on your bodies of water, click this video right here. If you're not already subscribed, hit that button right there. It'll help you subscribe to the channel and let you know when I post more videos just like this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate all the support and love recently. Give it a thumbs up, and as always, take care, tight lines. God bless. Pursue passion.